Assalamu alaikum girls. Hope you're all doing well today inshallah. This lesson we are going to cover the main components of computer systems, which is your next subtopic under chapter 1, types and components of computer systems. So let's get into it. The objectives from the syllabus that we will be covering in this lesson is one, that we will try to describe the CPU, which is the central processing unit, and we will discuss its role in the maintenance of the computer system, and we will also try to describe the internal memory, that is the RAM and the ROM, and what are the differences between them. So you might remember a couple of these differences from last year. Our success criteria for judging today's lesson is that at the end of today's lesson you must be able to list the differences between RAM and ROM, and as an extension task you could try to explain the use of BIOS and CMOS, but I will tell you more about this soon. When we think of the main components of any computer system, it can be divided into 4 parts. The first one is your input device, which is for example the keyboard and the mouse. The second is your output devices, for example the monitor and printer. The third could be storage devices, which are secondary storage devices, for example your rewritable DVD, the removable hard drive, your USB and so on. And the fourth main component is the processor and the internal memory devices. This fourth part or component is what we are discussing in today's lesson, and these 3 components will be discussed in your next theory recorded lesson. Under processor and internal memory devices, we will try to discuss the CPU today, which is your central processing unit, the internal hard disk, and the RAM and ROM. The internal hard drive or the main memory is the main memory of the computer. So whenever we say main memory, internal hard drive, it means the same thing. And this is where all the application softwares are stored, the disk operating system is stored, and all the data files are stored. So whenever you save a file, your main Windows operating system, any apps you have, all of this is stored in the main memory, which is also called the internal hard drive. The main advantage of the main memory is that it has a fast data transfer or access time and a large storage capacity. In your main memory or hard drive, you have which applications are installed. From the applications, temporary data will be held in the main memory, and then your CPU always checks the cache first for the required piece of data. So this brings us to the question of what is cache. Cache is a data storage which is in between the CPU and the RAM, such that if any data is already available in RAM because it's being taken up from the memory all the time, then it will be easy for the CPU to access this quickly rather than having to go all the way to the main memory to get the data. So that's why the CPU always checks the cache for the required piece of data, and if it's not in the cache, it will check the RAM and then transfer the next piece of data and so on. So you can see this GIF over here. When a CPU wants something, it checks in the cache first. If it's not in the cache, it checks in the RAM, and the RAM gets the data from the secondary storage, which is the hard drive, because cache is always forward thinking. Whenever anything is taken, it stores it here as well, because cache is the fastest type of memory among all the memories you have, and it stores those operations which are always repeated very often, such that the next time that same data is required, the CPU can get it directly from the cache. The cache is the fastest type of memory. It is between the processor and the RAM. We saw that it is between the CPU and the RAM. It collects data from the RAM if it does not have the data in it already. It holds on to commonly used data, and it automatically transfers the next set of data from the RAM to the cache. Now, a CPU chip you must have seen at some point. Even though it is a very integral part of your computer system, by size it can be small as your thumb. The part of the computer which interprets and executes the command from the hardware and software is called the CPU. It is the main central processing unit. It is made of multiple components and small integrated circuits which are now integrated into a single component called the microprocessor. It has three parts: the CU, the control unit, the ALU, which is the arithmetic and logic unit, and the RAM, which is the random access memory. Now let's see how we can describe the CPU and what is its role, because this is one of our main objectives for today. You must have heard from much long before that CPU is the brain of the computer. Why do we call it the brain? Because this is where all the searching, sorting, calculating and decision making takes place. And the speed of your CPU is measured in gigahertz. 1 gigahertz CPU means it can carry 1 billion instructions per second. So you can see it as a very fast processing speed. And some company that you would have seen before is, for example, Intel. You must have seen written on your laptop Intel Core i5, Intel Core i7 and so on. And then it gets into the question of what is RAM and what is ROM. RAM and ROM are parts of your main memory, where RAM stands for random access memory and ROM stands for read only memory. RAM is that part which temporarily stores instructions that the computer is running while the data is being processed by the CPU. So RAM comes in forms of cards like this. For example, you can see 4 RAM slots here, out of which 2 are filled. The RAM is volatile, which means that when your computer is turned off, all the data stored in the RAM is lost. So this makes us think what kind of data might be stored in the RAM. So for example, you have been working on a document and you did not save this document, and suddenly your computer switches off. You know that when you switch on your computer back again, you will not find the same data that you were typing before. Why is this? Because the RAM only temporarily stores that data for you and it was not permanently stored. That is why we say RAM is volatile, because any data in the RAM is turned off when the computer is switched off. In contrast, ROM is the opposite. It stands for read only memory and it is a built-in memory that cannot be changed. It holds the boot up instructions, and without it the computer would not know what to do when the on button is switched on. That means your operating system will not start. The ROM is non-volatile, which means that what is in the ROM is not lost when the computer is turned off. So for example, every time you turn on your computer, you see the startup of the Windows or Apple software. Why is this? Because the Windows operating system is stored in the ROM, which is the read-only memory, and the read-only memory is non-volatile. Non-volatile means memory will not be lost when the computer is turned off. Let's recap all the differences between RAM and ROM. First, we need to remember that the RAM stands for random access memory and ROM stands for read-only memory. RAM is volatile because see it says random access memory, while read-only memory ROM is non-volatile. The data in RAM is lost when the computer is switched off. The data in ROM is not lost when the computer is switched off. And the RAM stores data temporarily, we know that because the data is lost, and the ROM stores data permanently. The data is not lost when the computer is turned off. The extension task for today's lesson, which you can private message your teacher on Teams, is that we are going to look at the textbook and find out what is BIOS and CMOS. Find these terms in your textbook and try to understand what it is. This will be your extension task for today's lesson. And our plenary is again to pause the video and try to list the differences between RAM and ROM. That's all for today's lesson, girls. In the next recorded theory lesson, you will find the homework combining today's lesson and the next lesson. Thank you, girls. Have a good day ahead of you.